I am the most pampered and extravagant heir in the entire imperial city, yet I was forced into a marriage with the national general, Edward. Edward, powerful, ruthless, and decisive, with countless deaths on his hands, held so much authority that even the emperor was nothing but his puppet. On our wedding night, my screams echoed through the entire residence. Everyone was guessing when Edward would toss out my body. They waited and waited, but instead of seeing my corpse, they witnessed Edward gently rubbing my waist. Baby, I'm sorry. I'll be gentle tonight. 1. Father, I don't want to marry that so-called national general. In the Marquis's mansion, I clutched my father's legs and cried. My father, who always indulged my every whim, now sighed deeply. My son, I really can't do anything about it. Edward, he's not someone we can oppose. The moment I heard the name, I shivered instinctively. Edward, the national general of the current dynasty, wielding overwhelming power. Ruthless and merciless, he had wiped out an entire family of political opponents in a single night. The stench of blood had spread across the imperial city. Rumor had it that even the current emperor was merely his puppet. If I truly married him, I'd probably be dead in less than 2 days. My mother wiped her tears beside me. So the rumors were true. If only we hadn't let George and Derek meet yesterday. I sighed inwardly. Although the marriage decree came from the emperor, anyone with eyes could see that Edward himself had drafted it. Rumor had it that Edward liked Derek. But Derek wasn't of marriageable age yet, so Edward remained unmarried. Yet my mother had arranged for me to meet Derek yesterday. The next day, the imperial marriage decree arrived at our residence. And my betrothed was Edward. Clearly, he was obsessed with Derek. I had only met Derek once, and Edward was already desperate to trap me in his mansion to torment me for life. Poor me, the sacrificial pawn. I lifted my head, tilting it at a 45-degree angle to the sky to prevent my tears from falling. Father, Mother, you should start practicing a little trumpet. I don't think I'll live long. Oh, and while you're at it, help me pre-order a coffin from the workshop in the northern part of the city. I want one made of golden Nanma wood. Anything else won't feel comfortable to sleep in. 2. In the blink of an eye, it was our wedding night. Edward was still in the outer hall, and I sat on the bed like I was on pins and needles. The rough fabric of my clothes rubbed against my skin. If it wasn't high-end material, I would break out in rashes. Afraid that Edward might use my delicate nature as an excuse to hurt me, I forced myself to wear the plainest inner garments. It was so itchy. I reached into my clothes to scratch, only to feel moisture at my fingertips. Crap, I'd scratched it open. Hiss, it hurt. A pain that ordinary people could endure easily was magnified 1,000 times on my precious body. Even a light pinch could leave a red mark. Just as I was about to remove my clothes to treat the wound, I heard footsteps. Still in the middle of undressing, a small patch of skin on my chest exposed, I looked up, and met Edward's eyes. My breath caught. Edward's gaze was dark and imposing. He stopped only when he reached me. Just standing there radiated authority and pressure that brooked no argument, an aura only someone long in power could possess. I nervously swallowed and tried to look away, but he spoke without expression. Since you want to undress, then undress. Instantly, every kind of torture flashed through my mind. He isn't assuming I'm seducing him, is he? I shook my head, warily meeting his gaze. I'm not undressing. He spoke calmly. Don't make me say it twice. I was furious. No one in my life had ever dared to speak to me in that tone. I shook my head violently. Edward's patience snapped. His tall figure loomed over me. He lifted me and pressed me onto his lap. In the struggle, my clothes slipped to the floor. Cold air hit my bare skin, making me shiver instinctively. But what scared me more was the torture to come. My waist was brushed by his rough fingertips. I closed my eyes, preparing to face death. Then Edward's icy voice rang out above me. What's going on? I turned my head and saw Edward staring at the rash I'd scratched open. Red, dense spots marked my tender skin, glaringly obvious. Edward rubbed the rough fabric on me with his fingers, his expression unchanging. Your family really put you in this? 3. I bit my lip, not daring to say a word. If Edward knew that each piece of clothing I used to wear was worth a fortune, he'd probably strangle me on the spot. After all, Edward despised extravagance and decadence above all in the court. Every corrupt official had been ruthlessly stripped of their wealth and power by him. Because of this, I lived every day on edge, fearing that Edward might one day raid my family as well. He topped my personal list of the officials I hated the most. Just as my mind wandered, Edward spoke suddenly. Chris. At that moment, the door opened, and a shadow guard entered, carrying clothes and ointment. He placed the items on the table and immediately left. My eyes were fixed on the fabric, unblinking, my mouth watering. This had been gifted by another country just this year. Every inch of the material was worth a fortune, the epitome of luxury. Unfortunately, it was given to Edward, a prudish man who couldn't appreciate it. I swallowed hard, pointing at it in disbelief. This is for me." Edward gave a small nod under my hopeful gaze. Suddenly, I realized I didn't dislike him quite as much as before. Well, I could reluctantly move his name a little further down the list for now. I would observe his actions further. However, my good mood vanished the moment his fingers touched me to apply the ointment. Ah! A scream tore out of me like a slaughtered pig, echoing through the general's mansion. "Could you be gentler? Or I'll throw you into the servants' quarters to scrub the latrines." Only then did I remember, I wasn't in the Marquis's mansion anymore. The person applying ointment wasn't an ordinary servant, it was the infamous, powerful Edward. My vision went black. I wanted to faint on the spot. Edward's expression turned coal-black. I shrank back and whispered, "I'm sorry." As I spoke, a sudden thought struck me. Edward was probably using a sweeten then punish strategy, rewarding me gently and then delivering pain, to slowly torment me. How cunning! But unfortunately for him, he had encountered me, quick-witted and perceptive. I easily saw through his little scheme. 4. The moon had risen, and I stared at the room's only bed, feeling lost. Although I was well aware of my orientation, sleeping with Edward, this lifeless-faced man, was worse than death. Since the bed in this room was made of golden Nanma wood, the others must be the same, right? After hesitating, I mustered the courage to ask, "Can I sleep in another room?" Edward glanced at me, tone flat, "You may." I didn't expect him to agree so readily. Clearly, Edward had brought me to the mansion to torment me, not to actually sleep together. No matter, avoiding the same bed as him was a victory in itself. I happily pushed open the door to the next room, only to step back in dismay. Damn it, it wasn't a golden Nanma wood bed. There was no choice but to try the next room. After turning the mansion upside down, I realized in despair that every bed except Edward's was made of ordinary wood. Outside, the watchman's bell signaled it was already late into the night. The wind howled against me, and I shivered. After some mental preparation, I cautiously opened Edward's room, sporting 2 dark panda eyes. His breathing was steady, he was asleep. I gently tugged on his sleeve. "Can I sleep on your bed? If you don't say anything, I'll take that as a yes." I quietly climbed onto the bed, unaware of the faint curl of his lips forming. 5. The sun was high in the sky. Edward had gone to the palace early in the morning and hadn't returned yet. Just as I stepped out after breakfast, the mansion's steward approached. The master said that if there is anything about the mansion you find unsatisfactory, arrangements can be made to correct it. Ah, another sweeten then punish tactic. Edward probably assumed I wouldn't dare touch a single brick or tile of the mansion. He was gravely mistaken. I had seen through his plan. Rather than waiting nervously for doom, I decided to take control. I pointed at the floor's green bricks. "These are uncomfortable. Replace them all with white marble. Plant a few thousand-year-old ginkgo trees in the courtyard. Absolutely must be 1,000 years old, not a day less." An hour later, the steward's list already filled a full page. I was about to return to my room when I noticed the furnishings and smacked my forehead. "Oh right, replace all the beds in the mansion with golden Nanma wood." The steward's smile vanished, his expression troubled. "Your Highness, the mansion doesn't have extra funds." I was shocked. Just a little money from Edward. How could the entire National General's mansion be this poor? Could Edward be deliberately trying to torment me by having the steward refuse the bed replacement? But the fact that I could only sleep on a golden Nanma wood bed was known to very few. I studied the steward, his expression was honest, he didn't seem to be lying. Maybe they were really that poor. Still, if Edward came begging me for money, should I lend it to him or not? 6. After finishing the records, I snuck out of the National General's mansion while Edward was away. The streets were bustling with people, and I was just about to buy some flour pastries when I noticed a group heading straight toward me. They were notorious playboys in the Imperial City, and I did not get along with them at all. "Yo, isn't this our esteemed lord? Why are you out alone today?" Back in the day, whenever I went out in the Imperial City, I was always followed by dozens of servants. And now, on my one awkward solo outing, I ran straight into my enemies. My mood soured immediately. "What did you just bark at me? Want to eat shit? Go to the servants' quarters if you can't change that nasty habit of yours." His expression darkened in anger but then twisted into a sinister smile. "You really think you're the lord of the National General's mansion? Who in this city doesn't know you offended Edward, screaming in pain on your wedding night?" I froze. When was I screaming in pain? Oh, right. That must have been when Edward applied the ointment too harshly, and I let out that scream. Damn it, getting bullied in the mansion was bad enough, but now I was being slandered and mocked outside too. This insult could not be tolerated. Tired of arguing, I said, "You've got chives stuck in your teeth," and immediately swung at them. This wasn't the first time we'd fought. Normally, I came out on top. But I forgot. Today I had no attendants to help me. A single fist against 4 hands. I quickly fell behind. As a fist came down with a rush of wind, I shut my eyes tightly. Looks like I was about to get beaten. Today was definitely my unlucky day. But seconds passed, and the expected pain never came. Even the surrounding noise had vanished, the air dead silent. I cautiously opened my eyes. In front of me was a wide sleeve embroidered with cranes, and above it, Edward's dark, grim face. He hadn't said a word, yet the aura of authority he exuded alone made everyone tremble. The person whose wrist Edward was holding stammered, Master, we were helping to teach George a lesson." "Humph." Edward let out a cold snort. The next moment, that young noble's hand was broken on the spot. Edward's voice was dark and threatening. "You dare to discipline someone in my presence?" The others immediately sensed something was wrong, dropping to their knees to beg for mercy. Edward's gaze swept coldly over them, then landed on me. I instinctively lowered my head, bracing for a scolding. Every time I got into a fight before, my father would scold me afterward. Though he spoiled me, he never allowed me to disgrace the Marquis's mansion. I was mentally prepared to take the punishment, but Edward gently ruffled my hair. "Next time you fight, make sure to bring the mansion guards. They're not here just to eat. If that's not enough, I still have military tokens." "Military tokens? Is that allowed?" Before I could process Edward's words, he spoke again. "What did you come to the street to buy?" "Flour pastries." "All right." He then walked straight toward the vendor selling them. The vendor, long past 70, shook with fear the moment he saw Edward. Now, as Edward approached directly, the man trembled like a leaf in a storm, struggling multiple times to get the pastries into a bag. Edward didn't show the slightest impatience. Chris, standing beside me, suddenly laughed. "What are you laughing at?" I asked. He coughed to feign composure. It's been a long time since the master looked this happy." I rolled my eyes, seriously doubting that he'd spent too much time reading those romance books. Edward's care for me wasn't out of affection, it was to craft the image of a doting husband. That way, once I died, Derek might finally dare to enter the National General's mansion. 7. In the carriage, Edward and I sat side by side. Just as I was about to bite into a flour pastry, a thought struck me. Could he have poisoned it? No, I needed to test it first. So I held the pastry to Edward's lips. You eat first." Edward lowered his gaze, eyes darkening. Then came a presence so overwhelming it seemed to consume me entirely. It was like being a weak herbivore suddenly marked by a top predator in the food chain. A chill ran down my spine. As I tried to pull my hand back, Edward grasped my wrist firmly. Each beat of my pulse aligned perfectly with the warmth of his palm. He tilted his head, lifting my hand to eat the pastry, his eyes fixed on my face the entire time. The mischievous lift of his brows made him look devilishly tempting. My heart pounded violently. 8. That day, Edward went straight to the families of those noble youths and turned their households upside down. Those to be confiscated were confiscated, those to be exiled were exiled, leaving no margin. Some even begged me for forgiveness, hoping Edward would show leniency. Laughable. Whether I forgave them had nothing to do with Edward's actions. Edward wasn't doing it for me. Those families had long abused their power. Edward, though feared, had acted in the nation's and the people's interest. 9. Soon, the longevity festival arrived, and Edward and I entered the palace together. At the banquet, the desserts in front of me disappeared quickly. I sneaked a glance at the desserts before Edward. Fast, under a second, but he noticed. "Want some?" I nodded honestly. Edward picked up a dessert. I held out my palm in full begging fashion. He placed it at my lips, refusing to let go. "Last time you fed me, now it's my turn to feed you." Ha! That was unnecessary. My heart was conflicted, but the temptation of food won. I bit carefully, accidentally brushing Edward's fingers with my lips. The touch felt strange, but why was my face so warm? Even my ears felt hot. Something was definitely wrong. I stood up and whispered to Edward, "I'm going for a walk," then quickly fled the scene. 10. After standing outside for a while, enjoying the breeze, I was about to go back when a voice suddenly came from behind. "You little fox spirit, even Edward dares to be tempted by you." It was Derek, the one Edward was rumored to love. I had angered Edward because of the arranged meeting with Derek, which is why Edward had dragged me into the mansion to torment me. Back when we met, both of us had been pressured by our families, and we hadn't exchanged a single word. But judging by the tone now, this person had bad intentions. I tilted my head slowly, feigning confusion. "Who are you?" He sounded furious and shocked. "You don't recognize me? I met you for the family's arranged viewing." I blinked. "Oh, it's you. Too ugly to remember." "I don't care about that. You have to leave Edward immediately. I prodded my ear. Do you live by the sea? Mind your own business. His anger spiked. You should know Edward likes me, right? He hasn't married me yet because I'm still underage. 1 month from now is my birthday. By then, Edward will surely throw you out of the mansion. If you beg me now, maybe I'll let him spare you. I rolled my eyes, snapping my fingers in a delicate gesture, intentionally making my voice overly dramatic. Oh, too bad. Edward is my husband now. He's been keeping me in bed every day these past few days. Just now he insisted on feeding me in front of everyone. So annoying. Derek's face twisted like a pretzel. You shameless little weakling. Edward will beat you to death. Then he ran off in a flash. Humph, pathetic, ran away when he couldn't win an argument. Still, Derek had a point. Edward might really be avoiding marriage because Derek was too young, which left me with only 1 month. I looked up at the moon and felt a pang of sadness. Edward wasn't bad, handsome, well-built, but he had someone he loved. Our marriage was just a tool for him to torment me. Any emotional attachment would be fake. If I got attached, I would only fall into a pit of despair. 11. Not long after the Longevity Festival, the Emperor organized a royal hunt. During this time, I swore to myself to be someone who locks away their heart. Even though we were officially husband and husband, I could not let myself like Edward. Edward went deep into the hunting grounds with the Emperor and other officials. I stayed alone in the tent, reading a leisurely book. I had just turned a page when I heard a sound outside. A horse was grazing just outside my tent. Watching it so relaxed, I suddenly wanted to ride. I had ridden in the mansion before, but prolonged rides always left my inner thighs raw. Although Edward had told me to stay put in the tent until he returned, a short ride shouldn't be a problem, right? I swung onto the horse, and it started a gentle trot, following my guidance. But soon it bolted. No matter how hard I pulled the reins, the speed never decreased. The cold wind stung my face. The scenery flew by in reverse, and I clutched the reins tightly. It rushed past the outer and middle hunting grounds, only slowing deep inside. I quickly dismounted. The moment my feet touched the ground, the horse collapsed, foaming at the mouth, dead. Even a fool could see someone had deliberately tried to harm me. But with so many enemies from my sharp tongue, I couldn't tell who. The deeper hunting grounds were full of predators. Going in recklessly was extremely dangerous. And without a weapon, any predatory animal would be certain death. I prayed for luck. If only my ancestors could come down and bow frantically for me. But as soon as I stepped forward, a tiger's roar rang in my ears. From the nearby forest, a tiger emerged. At that moment, I wished I were someone else entirely, preferably drunk. Its sharp fangs glinted, and its red eyes locked onto me. Good news, it was a subadult tiger. Bad news, I still couldn't fight it. I knew I couldn't show fear, I had to exude dominance. But this tiger didn't play by the rules. It lunged at me. Its claws and teeth glinted coldly. This was it. And being killed by an animal alive, that would be agonizing. I never expected to die so miserably. Tears welled up, memories flashed like a slideshow. And at the very end, Edward's face appeared. 12. Hiss. A muffled groan reached my ears. I realized it wasn't a memory, it was Edward, really here. He stood in front of me, taking the full force of the subadult tiger's swipe. His lips went pale in an instant. In a flash, he drew his sword from his waist and plunged it straight into the tiger's heart. The tiger roared in defiance but finally collapsed. That strike seemed to drain all of Edward's strength. I supported his trembling body. Seeing the wound on his back almost exposing bone, I couldn't help but cry. It must have hurt so much. Edward, don't die, I whimpered. He weakly smiled, brushing the tears from my face. Why are you crying? I won't die. If you keep crying, you'll jinx me. Then who'll buy you flower pastries? I knew he was trying to keep me from worrying, teasing me into a smile. But seeing him this week made me want to cry uncontrollably. After a long hesitation, I asked the question I'd been holding back. Why did you save me? Was it really all just for Derek, to maintain his doting husband image? Edward lowered his eyes, smiled wryly, and said quietly, you guess. Soon, the others in the hunting grounds arrived. Edward was taken away to receive treatment. 13. I stood outside the tent, watching hot water turn into blood as he was treated, my fear growing. Edward's injuries were severe, reaching deep into the bone. Despite such serious wounds, he had been pretending nothing happened, joking casually in front of me. Though many in the imperial city wished Edward dead, and I had once thought the same. At this moment, I wanted him to live a long life. Time passed, my legs numb from standing, until finally Edward was out of mortal danger. I let out a long sigh of relief, but my heart was tangled, like threads impossible to separate. The question remained unanswered. I didn't know if Edward had saved me just to maintain his public image as a devoted husband, but I knew one thing: my recent vow was broken. I had truly fallen for him. 14. Edward's injuries healed well, but a scar remained on his back for life. He didn't care in the slightest. He said, "It's fine. You're the only one who'll ever see it, as long as you don't mind." I shook my head. How could I ever mind? After all, he'd gotten hurt saving me. The palace kept sending rewards, and Edward finally stopped being poor, but I never mentioned the golden Nanma bed again. The Lantern Festival was approaching, and soon after that, Derek's birthday. I thought it was time to ask Edward outright. If he truly liked Derek, I'd step aside without hesitation. 15. I finally gathered the courage. When I reached the door of Edward's study, just as I was about to knock, I noticed two shadows inside. Through the thin paper of the window, I could see Edward sitting at his desk with his back to me, and beside him stood a man. That man was none other than Derek. He wore the latest style popular in the Imperial City, clearly dressed up for the occasion. No one entered Edward's study without permission, so his presence there could only mean Edward had allowed it. My breath caught. My instincts told me to leave, but my legs felt heavy as lead. The next moment, Derek threw himself into Edward's arms. "Edward!" His voice cut sharply through the door. If this had happened in the past, I would have clapped and cheered, happy to see them together. But now, an indescribable ache welled up inside me. I didn't look any further. I stumbled back to my room, hollow and numb. The rumors were true. Edward really liked Derek, and our marriage was indeed part of his plan to torment me. I had calculated everything, except that his method would be to break me from the inside. He'd even been willing to risk his life just to put on a convincing show. I'd walked right into his trap and lost everything. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wonder how long Edward would have kept deceiving me. Not much longer, probably, because just earlier, he'd told me to wait for him at home tomorrow. Back then, I'd been overjoyed, thinking he wanted to spend the Lantern Festival with me. Only now did I realize he intended to end things with me on that day. Because the very next day was Derek's birthday, he wanted to get rid of me first. 16. The Lantern Festival arrived quickly. Darkness had fallen, but the night sky glowed as bright as day. Lanterns clustered across the lake, and fireworks painted the horizon. Everyone was filled with joy. Everyone except me. I was terrified. I had fled from the general's mansion, carrying only a small bundle of belongings. Before leaving, I wrote a letter of separation, saying I willingly dissolved our marriage and begging him, for the sake of the few months we'd shared as spouses, to spare my life and let me go. Sigh. I let out a long breath. I had no idea if Edward would actually show me mercy. I didn't dare go back to the Marquis' estate, so I followed the river, using the glow of lanterns to guide my way. I hadn't worn thick clothing, afraid I'd be slowed down and caught. But thin fabric couldn't keep out the biting winter wind, my bones felt frozen, and even my tears turned to ice on my cheeks. As I walked, footsteps suddenly sounded behind me. My heart pounded faster than ever. Could I really be this unlucky, running into a thief? I was just about to turn around when a warm fur cloak settled over my shoulders. Edward stood behind me, speaking gently. "Why are you dressed so thinly?" "You." I stumbled back a step, staring at him in fear. He bent down and fastened the cloak's buttons for me. "Didn't I tell you to wait for me at home? Why did you run off by yourself?" His voice was so calm, as though nothing had happened at all. It almost made me wonder if I'd imagined everything earlier. I hesitated, then said softly, "That letter." Edward lowered his gaze, a faint, self-mocking smile on his lips, but his tone was firm. "Divorce? I refuse." I nearly broke down. The tears I'd managed to dry welled up again. Even my voice shook. "Don't you like Derek? Why are you still coming after me? Please, just let me go." Edward's eyes softened with a strange sorrow. "Do you really not know who I like? George, after all this time, you still haven't remembered?" 17. It wasn't until Edward led me into the Imperial Palace and I stood on the very paving stones where I'd once gotten lost as a child that long-buried memories began to resurface. I was only 8 years old back then, attending a banquet in the palace when I accidentally lost my way. Terrified, I cried until I was a complete mess. After what felt like forever, I finally saw a figure passing by in the distance. I rushed to grab him, begging him to lead me out. They say saving a life is an act of great virtue, but the boy in front of me flatly refused. Desperate, I offered him my favorite pastry as a bribe. Sure enough, he couldn't resist the temptation of food and agreed to take me out. But once we were outside, I regretted giving up my pastry. To avoid looking stingy, I came up with a perfect plan. I tugged on his hand and said, "Big brother, I like you. When I grow up, will you marry me?" Then I furrowed my brows in fake hesitation. But I heard marriages require a betrothal gift. Can you give it to me now? When I grow up, I'll come find you with it. He understood and returned the pastry to me. Of course, that so-called betrothal gift went straight into my stomach the very same day, and I soon forgot about the silly promise entirely. When the memory ended, I was crying again. I'm sorry, but, don't you like Derek? I saw you holding him in your study. Edward actually laughed in anger. You were at my study yesterday. Why didn't you come in? You would have seen the man who tried to frame you during the royal hunt. I froze. What? Edward patiently explained. The person who plotted against you on the hunting grounds was Derek. They're already on the sentencing list, soon to be exiled. But that old fox sent Derek ahead of time to apologize. The reason Derek had been in Edward's study was obvious. Edward smirked. You left so fast you didn't see me kick him out the very next second. Funny, why aren't you that fast when I call you to bed? My face flushed crimson. I hadn't expected the truth to be like this. Just thinking about the divorce letter I wrote made me want to slap myself. Edward seemed to read my thoughts. That divorce letter. I cut him off immediately. It doesn't count. Of course it doesn't count. But Edward shook his head. No, I've changed my mind. I want a divorce now. I'll head back and sign it right away. I grabbed his hand in a panic, pleading miserably. Please don't. I'm begging you, don't divorce me. Seeing me on the verge of tears, Edward pinched my cheek with a smile. I'm teasing you. How could I ever bear to leave you? With that, he pulled a sky lantern from his sleeve. Time's almost up. If we don't release it now, it'll be too late. I tilted my head up. Everywhere I looked, lanterns floated into the night sky. A minute later, the lantern belonging to Edward and me rose slowly into the air. Among the countless lights of the festival, we were no longer just two separate souls. We were finally us. Extra story. 1. 8-year-old George was lost in the palace. Everything was eerily quiet except for the rustling of wind through the treetops. To George's frightened ears, the sound was like ghosts whispering death threats. His tiny feet pounded the ground as he darted through the maze of palace walls, still unable to find his way out. When another sharp gust of wind blew past, George burst into tears. He had no idea how long he'd been crying when he finally spotted a figure passing in the distance. Without thinking, he ran straight toward him. George blocked the boy's path, tears still clinging to his lashes. Big brother, can you take me out of here? 14-year-old Edward frowned. The little boy barely reached his waist. Dressed in fine clothes, with pale smooth skin, he was obviously some spoiled young master who'd never seen hardship. His round, spotless face looked like a cream pastry. Edward, however, disliked the boy immediately. Pretending not to hear, he tried to walk away, but his sleeve was suddenly tugged. Edward's temple twitched. He had a serious aversion to being touched. His left hand was covered with crumbs, and his right hand still held a pastry. He decided on the spot that this robe would never be worn again. George had no idea what Edward was thinking. He tilted his head up, wide-wet eyes full of pleading, and rocked Edward's sleeve back and forth. Big brother, please take me out, okay? Few could resist George's charm, but Edward was different. His voice remained cold. No. George cried harder, even wiping his tears on Edward's robe. Edward's patience ran out. He yanked his sleeve free and strode off, but hadn't taken 2 steps when George grabbed his hand instead. Edward could feel sticky crumbs smearing against his skin. For a fleeting moment, he wanted to wring this brat's neck. Sensing Edward's icy glare, George shivered, then stood on tiptoe and reluctantly offered the pastry he'd been treasuring. Big brother, this is my last pastry. You can have it. His big wet eyes never left the treat. Edward wasn't interested in sweets, but George's expression stirred a teasing impulse. He reached out and took it. Fine. George's heart sank. It was his favorite pastry, available only in the palace, and now he had to give his last one to this heartless villain. 2. Since Edward had accepted the pastry, he naturally had to take George out. Soon George saw people in the distance. Thank you, big brother. He glanced at the pastry in Edward's hand again and again, already regretting giving it away. Clearly this boy couldn't appreciate fine things. What a waste. Edward was planning to toss the overly sweet thing the moment George left anyway. But George's mind was already spinning with a new plan. He shook Edward's hand. Big brother, I like you. When I grow up, will you marry me? Same-sex marriages weren't unusual in the realm, but Edward had never been asked something so absurd, especially by an 8-year-old. If you don't say anything, I'll take that as a yes, George continued cheerfully. Outwardly he feigned hesitation, adding, but I heard marriages need a betrothal gift. Can you give it to me now? When I grow up, I'll bring it back to you. Edward instantly understood the little rascal's scheme. No one had ever dared to bargain with him so openly, but rather than anger, he felt oddly amused. It was the Lantern Festival. The palace and streets glowed with sky lanterns, the night bright as day under a canopy of floating lights. In that blaze of lantern fire, Edward handed the betrothal gift to George. 3. From that day on, Edward's shadow guards began reporting George's whereabouts daily. They had no idea why their master suddenly took interest in a mischievous little boy. The boy was spoiled beyond belief, wearing the finest clothes once before tossing them aside, eating only the best foods, even insisting on sleeping on a bed of rare golden Nanmu wood. Everyone knew Edward despised extravagance. Yet every time the guards reported George's lavish habits, Edward didn't get angry. In fact, he smiled. 10 years passed like this. At first, Edward had treated George as nothing more than an amusing younger brother, but somewhere along the way, those feelings quietly changed. He genuinely liked this extravagant yet clever young man. The problem was, George seemed to have forgotten their childhood promise. At palace banquets he never once looked Edward's way. If their eyes accidentally met, George would glance away in fear, the same wary look everyone had given Edward since he'd risen to power. George had really forgotten him. The boy deserved a good scolding for that. But Edward wasn't in a hurry. He wanted George to remember on his own. He waited, and waited, but instead of George coming to find him, news came that George was being matched with someone else. That was when Edward realized George was already 18, nearly a man grown. In a rush, Edward went to the palace to request an imperial marriage decree. Though he'd technically already given a betrothal gift years ago, Edward prepared hundreds of chests of gold, silver, and jewels, each priceless beyond measure. From then on, Edward, who'd never cared for luxury, began buying outrageously lavish, utterly impractical things. Someone even sent him a rare, delicate Persian cat. Yet Edward, who usually accepted every gift, refused this one outright. "Why would I need another?" he said lightly. "There's already one at home."